So with that, please welcome Tom Estill.
Great. Thank you, Randall. Thank you very much. And I'd like to also thank the Vermont Humanities for supporting this program and so many of the wonderful programs that they have throughout the year. So I'm Tom Estill, and like Randall said, I'm a member of the I'm the board of directors of the Vermont, New Hampshire chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. I've been involved with chestnuts now since 2007. So why? What happened in 2007? Now, I do have a PowerPoint presentation, but throughout this presentation, I'm going to tell you stories, because I like stories, and it really adds to the presentation. And these stories I think you're really going to enjoy hearing about. So what happened in 2006 is this. At that time, I had the privilege of working for the space agency at Goddard Space Flight Center in their education department. And on the weekends, I would have Saturday and Sundays off usually. I would go walking usually around my apartment along the Patuxent River, observing the birds and the wildlife, something I've done all my life. And I heard about this place called Patuxent National Wildlife Refuge that had volunteer opportunities. So I visited there one day and told them about my background, and they said, well, Tom, we think you'd be perfect for the electric train that goes around the wildlife refuge and tells people about all the wonderful things that are happening. So on the first day I did that, my mentor, he's the driver, he's pointing out all these things that I'm supposed to talk about. And as we're returning back to the visitor center, there's a fenced-in area with some trees growing in it. And I asked him, I said, well, what's going on with those trees? Because he didn't mention it. He said, oh, it's a little research plot that the American Chestnut Foundation is trying to grow some blight-resistant trees. I said, chestnut trees, really? I thought they were pretty much gone. He said, no, they're still surviving. The trees may get infected, but the sprouts will come from the roots, and they'll grow up again and get infected, and repeat that over and over and over again. I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. And that interest stayed with me. When my program ended at Goddard Space Flight Center in 2012, I had to work a few more years before I retired. And I had spent a couple of years here in Rutland before I moved out west. And I said, well, let me see what I can find in Rutland. That's halfway between my son, New York, and my daughter in Vermont. That'd be a perfect spot, and I know something about Rutland, so let me see what they have. And there were 2 job openings in 2012 for me. One was to run the men's department at JCPenney's, and then the other one was a science teaching job at Christ the King School. So I heard about the one at JCPenney's first, and they offered me the job, and I said, well, yeah, just give me a day to think about it. And within that day, the science job came up, and the principal called me and said, Tom, we'd love to have you. So I took the science job. From there, my first year teaching at Christ the King School, the 8th graders have to have a big community service project. So I thought about, well, why don't we start growing American chestnut trees? So I had to find a spot to do that. And actually, I learned about Pine Hill Park and started growing, planting the American chestnuts up at Pine Hill Park, which we've been doing now since 2014. And at this point, we're at 50 trees up there in 5 different spots. If you ever visit Pine Hill Park and you see little red flags sticking out of the ground, that red flag is right next to an American chestnut tree. So the kids have been taking care of those trees for a number of years now. And I'll go tell you a little bit more about that as we get into the program. But anyways, that's where my interest in the American chestnut tree started. Now, as far as being a member of the foundation, when I first came out here to Vermont and I said, well, let's grow chestnut trees at Pine Hill Park, I had to get those chestnut trees from someplace. And I actually went all over the country trying to find landscaping places that would sell chestnut seedlings, and I found a few. One in Georgia, so there's Georgia chestnut trees growing in Pine Hill Park. Found one in Ohio, so we have Ohio trees growing in Pine Hill Park. Found one in Wisconsin, so they're going there. Maryland, and then someone told me, well, Tom, you can get the trees through the foundation, the American Chestnut Tree Foundation. So, wow, I didn't even know that it existed. So I contacted the foundation and said, yes, you can get chestnuts from us. I thought, wow, that's great. I'll have the kids grow the chestnut tree. And how do I do that? Well, you send us $336, and we'll give you 10 nuts. And I said to myself, and this is true, I said, what a racket this is. These guys, what a ripoff. I'm not going to fall for that, you know. It's like it's a con job. And here I am, 10 years later, on the board of directors of the American Chestnut Foundation, New Hampshire, Vermont chapter. Once I realized what the money was going for, and there was some validity to it, I joined the foundation. Okay, so the talk tonight is about the American chestnut. Its history, demise, restoration. Look at those pictures, folks. Isn't that amazing? Early 1900s. Look at the size of those trees. In the 1800s, 1900s, the American chestnut was considered, and it was nicknamed, the redwoods of the East Coast. That was their nickname. Isn't that amazing? Look how big they were. Some of them, could reach a height of 120 feet. 120 feet and 13 feet in diameter. Monstrous, huge, massive trees. A major part of the forest of the eastern United States. Them and oak trees were the predominant trees found here in the East Coast. They have big trees. So, what happened? Got another interesting story for you. The year's 1904. The director of the Zoological Gardens in New York City, now known as the Bronx Zoo, was very proud about his zoo. He had animals from all over the world. And he had some of the biggest trees in New York were in his park. He was also very proud of those trees, American chestnut trees. They were massive. Across the street from him was the New York Botanical Gardens, which has trees from all over the world, including the American chestnut tree and a recently arrived Asian chestnut tree. Now, in 1904, there was a recently developed, actually it was 1862, the Department of Agriculture was established here in the United States. They didn't have federal guidelines for quarantine. I think you all know where this is going at that time. That wasn't established until 1912. So here's this Asian chestnut tree in the botanical garden, because that person who was running that botanical garden wanted trees from all over the world, and he heard about these Asian chestnut trees, and he was able to get some over into his facility. So in 1904, the director of the Zoological Gardens there noticed that the American chestnut tree branches were starting to die. He said, well, just no problem, just cut them off. And he would cut off the dead branches, and pretty soon more and more of the branches were dying, and it seemed to be spreading. That's where it all started. It was right there, at the Zoological Garden in 1904. And since then, after that, it started to spread like wildfire across the country. It wasn't until later that they figured out it was this Japanese tree that when it was brought over, it carried on a fungus, which didn't affect the Asian chestnut trees because they had evolved with this fungus for thousands of years. Asian chestnuts grow fine with the fungus, but the American chestnut tree wasn't ready for this new type of fungus, and that's what started the issue. They realized shortly afterwards, after realizing that, hey, this chestnut tree from Asia, it's not getting the disease. When they started to realize the connection between the fungus and the tree, the original trees from Asia. So that's where it really started. Okay. This is, American chestnut is not a horse chestnut. 2012, when I first started growing the chestnuts at Pine Hill Park with the students, I had one of the parks people come up to me and said, Tom, I have a chestnut tree, it's in my dad's property. At that point, I realized how rare that was. I said, oh my gosh, please, can you bring me a burr? It was in the fall time when the burrs, and I'll explain burrs to you in just because we kind of like carry the seeds in a few minutes. She said, I have a burr, I have the seeds. I said, well, could you bring it to me? And she brought it to me, and she's all excited. And then she shows me what she had. It's up on the top right there. I looked at it and I said, oh, it is a chestnut, but it's a horse chestnut. Totally, completely different tree. And it was like, oh, my heart sank. And by the way, the horse chestnut is, you can't eat the seeds. You'll get very sick if you do. But we do have horse chestnuts around this area. But horse chestnut and American chestnut are not the same thing. They're two completely different trees. This is the American chestnut. This is the tree that you see on the left is very similar in size to the two that have been discovered at Pine Hill Park. Very similar to that. There's probably more at that park. I've been visiting that park pretty much every week for the last 11 years, seriously. And I've looked all over. So 2 is all that's been found so far. But there's probably more. But this is the American chestnut. If I could get a drone over the forest in the springtime, I'd probably see the white flowers that you see on the top right there. Those little green things are female flowers. The little white catkins are the male flowers. The leaves are, think of them as a canoe, and I always like to look at the edges of the American chestnut tree and think of ocean waves. They look a lot like ocean waves. But that's the American chestnut tree. So here's the male flowers, which if I could, like I said, if I could get a drone out in the springtime, you could probably see these white flowers. And here are the burrs that contain 2 or 3 nuts. Those burrs, I'll be honest with you folks, I don't know how this guy is holding them in his hand because those are very sharp spikes, and there's a lot of them. And it hurts to hold these things in your hand. I learned that very quickly. And after handling one burr, after that, I've always held them with a glove. It hurts. It really does. Big golf, tennis ball size structures. Here we go. This is what they look like with the seeds, even containing 2 or 3 seeds. Last year was the first time in the history of Vermont school children were able to successfully take care of these trees to the point in the back of the school where they produced fertile seeds. I tried to get WCAX. I tried to get our local newspaper. No one came. On the day that we brought them into the classroom and opened them up, but I took pictures. I took pictures. Isn't that something? There they are. We were really hoping. I was hoping so much to see them this year, and sure enough, early spring, I looked at the trees, and the male catkins were just starting to come out. I go, yes, we're going to get this year. We're going to get a bunch of trees. Last year was only 2 trees, and I personally took the pollen off of one tree and put it on the female flowers of the others just to make sure. And we only had 2 trees out of the 20 that were mature enough. And this year, most of them reached that point. I was so excited. And then the frost. Remember that? Followed by the rain. So I'll show you some horrible pictures in a few minutes. But those are our seeds. Historically, you can see it was an East Coast tree. Look at Vermont. Anybody want to guess why it goes up on the left side and the right side of Vermont? What's on the left side and the right side of Vermont? Connecticut River and Lake Champlain. There you go. It goes up. And there's a little bit, right about where you see the letter V, an area right there where there were some. My understanding is that there were some historically over in the West Rutland area, right over there. But now we haven't been Rutland because someone's been planting them for 11 years. We have a lot of them. So, all right. And of course, White Mountain National Forest, they did really well over there in the White Mountains historically. What were the cultural, economic benefits? Justin, you had mentioned that they grow really fast. They are fast growing. They are a very fast growing tree. And they get, you can see an enormous size. The 2 up at Pine Hill Park are around 70 feet tall. I have a little device called a clinometer that I can look through, and it tells me what the height of the tree is. I have a special type of tape that tells me what the diameter is. So we have fast-growing, rot-resistant. On that first time that I took the electric tram, learning how to speak to the public about the history of the Patuxent National Wildlife Refuge, we made one stop. One of the stops was this dead tree. It was a telegraph pole, old telegraph pole from the 1860s. And the driver said, well, folks, when you're looking at this pole now, you're looking at the pole which sent, it was a telegraph pole, and on that telegraph pole was sent the message that President Lincoln had been assassinated. And that line goes all the way up to Boston, New York City. That's the pole that carried the message. And I'm looking at this pole, and I'm thinking, that thing's been here for over 100 years. And I really appreciate the fact that when I hear that it's rot-resistant, it's rot-resistant. And it was sitting in a swamp, wet soil for over 100 years. And the thing looks like, I mean, it's dead, but I mean, it looks like one of the telephone poles that you see out here. It just amazed me. And of course, it was a major food source for the Appalachian region. The Native American Indians use it for a number of different things. Their boats, their houses were made of chestnut because it's rot resistant. And of course, buildings, farms, fence posts, telephone poles, and tannin. You get the tannin from which they use to make leather, and all sorts of furniture, refrigerators, chairs, and of course horse harnesses, and food. The production of American chestnuts was so great that hundreds and hundreds of carloads, train carloads of these nuts would be transported down to Boston, New York City for distribution for people. Isn't that amazing? Wow, there's a lot of nuts are being produced. And of course, they use the food to feed their cows and other type of animals they'd have on the farm. Wildlife, all sorts of wildlife eat the chestnuts. You can see. And all of them, all those benefits are now gone. Okay. And that was that blight that was brought over from Asia in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Okay, again, it was first identified in New York in 1904, and spread like wildfire. The 50 trees at Pine Hill Park, they're just now, not all of them. One, last year, I saw the first signs of the blight. I knew it was going to happen. I mean, there's not a single American chestnut tree in the United States, not a single wild American chestnut tree that isn't infected with the blight. You won't find any. I guess I was dreaming. I think maybe if it's far enough north, yes, I don't know. So the blight's now started with those trees. And the little red growth here on the trunk is the telltale sign that the tree has been infected. So that means all the other ones will eventually. But those trees that we planted at Pine Hill Park and the trees that are planted in every single school here in Rutland, all of them, they all come from what they call champion trees, big, giant American chestnut trees that have survived for a long time. So it's very likely that the trees all around this area will survive to grow to a very tall height and produce burrs and produce some seeds. Okay? But eventually, the tree, as they all do, eventually it will die. Or they will die. Okay? So the start in 1904, and you can see as years go by, it got worse and worse, spread over greater and greater territory as the years went by. And finally, in 1950, it reached as far south as it could, where those furthest southern growing trees were found. So it took almost 50 years, but that covered the whole region. Okay. So what did they do? Well, first of all they said, well, it's spreading. Let's do some tree series. Let's cut off a limb, cut off a branch or something. And they found that very quickly that was doing nothing. Let's spray fungicide. Think about this, folks. There was about 4 to 5 billion in the 1800s, early 1900s, 4 to 5 billion American chestnut trees. So how are you going to spray? How are you going to spray that many trees with fungicide? So practically, it was not working. It did not work. So they couldn't do that. Oh, we'll make barriers. The tree's starting in New York, so let's go out about 25 miles and cut down all the American chestnut trees in a circle around this area and act as a barrier. Well, a spore, a fungal spore, it gets caught up in the wind, can travel literally hundreds of miles. So that was not infected. Well, let's just get rid of the infected trees as quick as we can. Cut them down. Cut them down. That's where foresters think that the biggest mistake was made. Because when they started cutting down all these trees, they cut down the trees that weren't infected also. They just clear cut them down. They may very well have killed some trees that were naturally immune. By cutting them all these down, they lost that opportunity. Crossbreeding. Well, let's take an American chestnut and crossbreed it with a Chinese chestnut tree. Let's say I do that tomorrow. Let's say I take an American chestnut tree and put some, take a pollen from it and put it on the Chinese chestnut tree. And okay, so we're gonna have to wait 5 years or 6 years for this to grow up to produce seeds, and then let's take those seeds and plant it another 4 or 5 years. It takes a long time to do that. They have been doing that now for a number of decades. We'll talk to you a little bit more in detail about that, but it is being tried. It's one of the methods that they're trying to bring back the American chestnut. The Chinese chestnut, well, why not just grow Chinese chestnuts? Fine. Some people do that. There are Chinese chestnuts in Vermont. Some people are growing. But taste the Chinese chestnut and taste an American chestnut, and you'll see why the Chinese chestnut isn't a very popular tree in the United States. They don't have that sweet taste to them. I've tasted Chinese chestnuts from Price Chopper, and honestly, I've thought of them, they're not kind of bland, my own opinion. I've tasted an American chestnut, and it's a sweet nut. Tastes really good. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of Chinese chestnuts around it. It doesn't grow to a real big tree. It's kind of like a big, gigantic shrub rather than a big, tall, majestic tree. So it just hasn't caught on, and it's not doing well here in the United States. Okay, so the American Chestnut Foundation, where did it all start? Well, Dr. Charles Burnham was a geneticist at Minnesota. He was doing the back crossing. He would take an American tree and an Asian tree, a Chinese chestnut, cross them and get the offspring, and then do it again and again and again, trying to get an American chestnut tree that had taken on some of that natural resistance, but has the American characteristics. And then Philip Rutter in 1981, he began something totally different. He says, well, this back cross breeding doesn't seem to be doing it, but I have a better idea. And it's kind of interesting what he did, okay? So the American Chestnut Foundation is undergoing 3 different directions in trying to bring back the American chestnut tree. And one of them is doing really well, okay? First of all, the biological control. Biological control is this. The American chestnut disease was spreading like crazy in the 1950s. But scientists realized early on that European chestnuts, and there's 7 different kinds of chestnuts on the planet Earth, the ones in Europe were infected, but they weren't doing too bad. They'd get a canker, and it seemed to take care of itself, and the tree would grow to a pretty good size. The scientists realized, through doing some study of that fungus that was causing the European tree to get infected, that the fungus was infected itself by a virus. So the American scientists said, why don't we see if we can infect the funguses here in the United States with a virus and see if that helps control the spread. And it has some success, but we go back to the problem that they had way back in the early 1900s. If you're going to do that, put a virus into the fungus, you're going to have to go to every single tree. And who's going to have the time and the money to do that? So what they're working on now is trying to figure out a way to quickly get the virus into the fungus that's causing the problem. Because it seems to work, but it's just the problem is getting that out there quickly and a reasonable amount of time and money. So there is some success there. Back cross breeding, they've been doing it for a number of years. And the bottom line is this. They're not having the results that they expected as of today. They've been doing it for decades. And they get a tree that they consider mostly American chestnut. It has a little bit of the Chinese chestnut in it, that part that they think has the ability to kill the fungus, but it's not working. they now realize that it's not simple genetics, it's very complex genetics involved here. So it's more difficult than they thought it would be, but they're not giving up on it. They're still doing that. The third method is biotechnology. And that's pretty cool. Let me explain this. The hypervirulence, again, they infected the fungus with the virus, and it seems to work. You can also, and I tried this up at one of the trees at the Pine Hill Park, and it worked. You can also take, well, let me back up a little bit. When an American chestnut tree gets infected and starts to die, it reaches a point where it's considered a dead tree. It's not completely dead. The roots are still alive. And from those roots will grow tiny little American chestnut trees right from the roots. Why do the roots survive? The roots survive because the microorganisms that are in the soil can kill that fungus from Asia. So why not, if you see the infection start, why not take some mud from the soil right around the tree and pack it on that red area that has the fungus and see if that kills the fungus? And it does, it works. But once again, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do this for every single tree. And that's just, it's almost impractical to do that. So that's the biological control. And of course, the back cross breeding, they've been doing it for decades, combining American and Asian trees. They've done it for a number of generations. We've been, at this point, we're up at this, what is called B3, F3 tree, which I am so sorry to tell you. We have, good news is we have some B3, F3 trees back here. The bad news, I don't know which ones they are because the person that gave me these, and I'm not going to mention the person's name because I don't want to get in trouble. When they put the labels on, you can see them right there on those black containers. They didn't realize if you're going to put ink on those labels and you're going to put it out in the sun and the rain, after a couple of weeks, it's probably going to be washed away. So one of those, there's 9 B3, F3 trees back there someplace, which are 15 out of 16% American chestnut, mostly American chestnut trees. But again, they don't have the vigor, they don't grow as well, so they're still working on this back crossing. They're trying to figure out what the problem is. And scientists who are working on this truly believe that they can figure this out and get a blight-resistant tree eventually. Okay? So they're not giving up on it. Okay. And here's the orchard down in Virginia where they're doing just that. There's a number of 4 or 5 big farms where they're growing American chestnut trees back with these back crossing. These chapters that you see here are all involved some way with working with back cross trees or other types of American chestnut trees. And how do they get the pollen from one tree to another tree, an American chestnut to a Chinese? They do this controlled pollination. They're doing this. This is type of things that we do here in Vermont and New Hampshire. They'll actually go take the pollen from one tree, put it on the female flower of another tree, then cover that up so that it's not pollinated by some other type of American chestnut tree, and cover them up with bags that are squirrel-proof. So a lot of work and time goes into collecting the seeds. A lot of work and time. And every year they send me a whole bunch of these seeds to grow and then pass them out to schools and people that might be interested in starting their own orchards. And these are my leftovers, by the way, that you have at the table. So I have at the end of the season. Okay. So there's a lot of work goes into getting these seeds that you see here. Okay. And the people have what they call chestnut orchards. We have a 20-tree orchard behind Mount St. Joseph's. There's a 50-tree at Pine Hill Park. There's a 60-tree test orchard at the Allen Street School across from the hospital. And every single school in Rutland has trees. And at this point, I've taken it upon myself to try to get American chestnut trees into every single school in Vermont. So I'm up to almost 60 right now, 60 schools. A few in New Hampshire. When I was doing Bradford, Vermont, and Fairleigh, Vermont, schools across the river said, "Hey, how come they're getting them and we're not?" Okay, I'll bring yours to some New Hampshire. So some of the New Hampshire schools have them too. So, all right. Recent finding: back crossbreeding is more complicated than originally thought. It may require a different approach. They're not sure. But now biotechnology, transgenic. This is the one that the 60-tree experimental orchard at Allen Street School is involved with. Scientists have known for many, many years that there are a number of different plants in the middle of the United States, especially this wheat plant, that's immune to fungus infection. So a scientist thought, well, why is that the case? Let's look at their DNA. And they were actually able to determine what gene on the wheat plant DNA protects that plant from a fungus infection. So scientists from the State University of New York, Environmental Science and Forestry campus said, what if we take that gene from the wheat plant and put it into the DNA of the American chestnut? Then we should have a tree that is immune to the fungus. So they've been working on that since 1990. Okay. Preliminary results have been very, very positive. This is basically, they identify the gene over on the top left there in the wheat plant. They take it out, cut it out, put it into a bacteria, which then transfers that DNA into a embryo, American chestnut embryo on a petri dish. That's how it works. Okay. Wow, can you imagine the technology that's gone into this? The basic research that was required to figure that out. Did it work? Wow, look at this picture, folks. There's the wild American chestnut on the left. The darling 54 American chestnut in the middle looks great. And then the Chinese chestnut, which again doesn't grow as well here in the United States, but it survived the infection. But look at that American chestnut, darling 54. They were able to successfully do that. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing, you guys? So when they did that, they ended up with American chestnut trees that were 99.999% American chestnut. It has those two genes. Are they genetically modified? Yes. I'm not going to lie to you. It's funny how I talked to some of the people on the foundation. I said, well, people have a difficult time with GMOs, and I said, yeah, no, I know, Tom, but it's just, and I said, no. You need to be straight with people. It's a GMO, but the American chestnut has thousands and thousands of genes, so we put one more gene into it. Is it really that much different? And folks, what plants at Price Chopper or Hannaford in their vegetables are not GMOs? Which ones have not been changed over over the centuries from genetic modifications in one way or the other. So, and to explain this a little bit more, the gene produces it's called oxalate oxidate, OXO, okay? And that oxalate oxidase is found in a lot of different types of food. Nothing special about that gene. Okay? But with the American chestnut, the oxalate oxidate does this. A fungus produces oxalic acid. It's that acid that kills the American chestnut. If you have a gene that produces oxalate oxidate, which will destroy that oxalate acid, well, you should have a plant that's going to do just fine. It turns that oxalate acid into H2O2, which is hydrogen peroxide, and carbon dioxide. And the plant gets rid of that through respiration, and we now have a way through a genetic modification of producing a blight-resistant tree, and it seems to be very successful. By the way, it's under, of course, it's got to go under a lot of review, and it's been doing that for years. Scientists say, well, the leaves that are produced by this tree, are they going to be a problem? So they're doing all sorts of experiments. One I think is the cutest one is this. The leaves of this transgenic American tree falls to the ground, goes into a stream, and tadpoles are going to feed on those dead leaves, which they do. Well, let's do an experiment. Let's put in these tadpoles and these transgenic leaves and use a control with regular American chestnut trees and see what happens. And the tadpoles that were feeding on the transgenic tree grew a lot bigger than a normal American chestnut tree. So that didn't seem to be a problem. They did all sorts of chemistry to make sure that the nuts, the transgenic nuts, are going to be safe for people to eat, and everything is fine. There's absolutely no difference as far as nutritional value or any poisons or anything like that. That doesn't exist. They've studied, well, what's going to happen to the bees that pollinate them? Are they going to be affected? No, the bees, the insects that feed them are just fine. So they've done all these tests over many, many years, and it's been determined that the transgenic tree is a very safe tree. It's not going to be a problem. Now, the foundation thought that this summer the EPA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, would finally give the okay to release these thousands of transgenic American chestnut trees that are now in New York and some in Maine, Virginia, finally give the okay to release them. Okay. They're clones. And that's a problem because you need two different American chestnut trees, two different trees to get viable nuts. It's called a dioecious tree, and there are a number of different kinds of dioecious trees, trees that can't fertilize themselves. They need to be fertilized by another tree. When you leave tonight, if you want viable nuts, you're going to have to take at least 2 trees with you, okay, at least 2. So where was I going with this? Oh, so now we thought that they would give the okay. One of the reasons I've been going around schools, having schools planting trees, is because I wanted them to be ready for when the time comes for these transgenic trees to come out into the public. Their schools will have trees that are already this tall, and maybe next year, very likely next year, they'll start to produce flowers. And when the EPA says, yes, it's okay, we'll get some of those trees, plant them right next to those trees, and those students will be able to get, schools will be able to get viable nuts, half of which will be blight resistant. So right now there's 60 trees at Allen Street School. Another reason of putting these trees all out there is that we're preserving the DNA of these wild American chestnut trees before they die. So we're getting them out, we're growing them. There's 60 of them at Allen Street School. From some of them from the Allen Street School are from, some of the trees are from Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, a number of different places. And so all the trees are in the schools around here. They're all from different locations, all getting ready for the time when the trees that are transgenic will be okayed to be brought out into the public. So let's see what else we have in. All right, so that's what's happening right now. By the way, if you find a nut-producing American chestnut tree, the foundation wants to know about it. And then they're going to send someone out. If it's in this area, it'll probably be me. I'll go out and I will collect a sample of the tree and then send it to Kendra Collins, who will then determine whether it's a wild American chestnut or if it's a hybrid. It might be a tree that's part Asian Chinese chestnut, might be a purebred, I don't know. So, but if you find one, you can always send a leaf sample here. And the website, if you go to the American Chestnut Foundation website, it has all this information for you. If you forget about that, you don't know what to do, go to Randall, send the lease, and Randall knows how to get a hold of me and says, Tom, so-and-so has the lease. And so you can do that. Let's see what we have here. Okay, become a TACF member if you like. You can give out gift memberships. You can volunteer. So I started out as a volunteer, and these contacts I'll just pass off with you. But Evan Fox is the president of the Vermont, New Hampshire Foundation, and Kendra Collins is the scientist for Vermont, New Hampshire. She's up at UVM. I have my contact information. If you're interested, I'm going to give you a sheet of paper. If you take trees, the sheet of paper has the directions on how to grow your trees and my contact information. So if you are interested, I can help you out directly. Okay, this is me standing by one of the trees at Pine Hill Park. Look at the size of that. Nice size. 70-foot tall American chestnut. One of them, I found two of them. One of them was doing great. They're both infected, but they're both producing, they were both producing burrs. And then last year, 2 years ago, we had do you remember the spongy moth, formerly known as the gypsy moth, the spongy moth infestation? Wow, boy, the Vermont forest, took a beating. They completely defoliated one of the American chestnut trees at Pine Hill Park. That was last year, and this year, the leaves never came back. But little shoots are coming out the side of the tree. It's like, good. Okay. The other tree wasn't touched, and the floor is covered with these burrs. So, yes, there are wild American chestnut trees here in Rutland County, folks. They really are. That's me climbing up this ladder. I'm 72 years old, climbing up the ladder in the forest, getting yelled at by my daughter. Don't ever do that again. Holding a 10-foot pole, cutting off these limbs so I can get leaves to send to Kendra Collins. The students around the city are now planting trees, chestnut trees on their school grounds or at Pine Hill Park. Those 50 trees are cared for by the 8th grade students at Christ the King School. That's a couple of them right there. But they planted that tree last year. During the summertime, I'm sent seeds, usually around 100 seeds. I have that big south-facing window. There's one of the young students there, Ava, who's watering all the little baby American chestnut trees. By the end of the summer, the size of what you see right back there. Okay, so this is Northwest Elementary School. There's 3 doing very well. Those trees they'll flower probably in 2025, I'm guessing. I visit the schools. I give presentations. This is the Woodstock High School. This is the horticultural class. So they started growing American chestnut trees on their school. There's me giving a talk to students in Bridgewater. So I'm all over the place. I'll go any place in Vermont to give a talk. Here's the 20 trees behind Mount St. Joseph School. You can see the very center. There's a really big tall one. There's another one off to the left. Those 2 trees flowered last year. First time students were able to grow trees to the point where they flowered and they got burrs filled with viable nuts. Oh, I'm sorry, I went backwards here. This year, remember the flooding we had? A drainage was blocked. Someone goofed just outside the school, and all backed up. And it wiped out 15 of the 20 trees. And about, I don't know, most of all of them were going to be flowering this year, and it was just crushed my heart. Because this, I consider, the one behind MSJ, this was not the 60 tree up at Ouse Street School, but this one I considered the flagship because it was the first one to produce the nuts, and this one was going to be the big nut producer. But this 15 out of 20. So what I did, you notice that there's green behind the flooding area up by the wall there? So guess what I planted up near the wall? I planted 5 more. So we have now 10 viable trees. Hopefully that they'll flower next year. Here's the 5 I planted right by the fence, away from the highest point of flooding. So I think they're going to be just fine. Here's the burrs from last year at Mount St. Joseph's. The students, the advanced biology students, were taking care of the trees. By the way, every time the student does this, they get community service hours. And you know, if you're going to graduate from Rutland High School or MSJ here in Rutland, you have to have those. If any school, if you're going to graduate from any school in Vermont, you have to have community service hours. So the kids enjoy doing it. We took them into the lab, opened up the burrs, noticed the gloves, and got the seeds. So that's where we're at right now with the American chestnut. It's the transgenic tree is showing a lot of success. The feeling is that it's going to pass EPA inspection and all within a few months. It shouldn't be. There has been no problems, no signs that it would be a problem tree at all. So we're hoping for that passing. As soon as it does, they're going to hit. There's 10,000 transgenic American chestnut trees already producing pollen that are ready to be passed out. And that's great because the schools here, at least in Rutland, and 50-some other schools in Vermont, they have their trees that are already growing. They'll be ready, and we'll have a lot of American chestnut trees growing here in Vermont in another year or so. We're at the northernmost range. They don't grow much farther than where we are right now, folks. So I'm surprised they're doing as well as they are. And in fact, there's scientists that are wondering, why are these trees in Rutland doing so well? And some scientists are thinking, geez, climate change. It's like, wow, it's really here. We're getting American chestnut trees growing all over Vermont, and that was not historically the case. So, all right, so I'll open it up with questions. Before I do that, some of you may want to leave early, which is fine. If you'd like to take some of the American chestnut seedlings I have over here, I'm going to show you something here. They come in pots, 1 tree per pot. If you want to take, please, if you're going to plant them, if you want nuts, you're going to have to take at least 2 trees. You can wrap them with these rubber bands, the pots with rubber bands, so you can carry them all at once. And here's a sheet that gives you directions and my contact information if you have any questions. on how to grow the American chestnut tree at your home. Okay, please take them. These are all ones that aren't taken over. Randall's going to take them downstairs and let the people who come to the library, if anybody wants to take some home with them, they'll be able to do that. All right, well, we have a few minutes for questions, I believe. Randall, are we okay? Okay, so do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
I have something growing that is alleged to be a chestnut tree. But it kind of almost looks like, if I don't take care of it, it kind of looks like a bush with a whole bunch of little things growing on it. Is that a chestnut?
So, sir, I'm going to tell you, if you could, after the program, if you could wait, and I'll take your address, and I'll come and visit your house. I'd like to do that. That's important. We're always looking for wild American chestnut trees. So if it is one, that's big news. That's real big news. So yes, I'll be there. I'll be there Friday. Seriously, I will be. That's yeah. We want wild American chestnut trees. Yep, that's not. Yep, I can tell you, yes, that's not unusual. I watered an American chestnut tree this morning right out on the grounds of a Christ King school. That I was looking at the number, thinking, maybe I should cut back on. I don't want to do that. If I cut it, it provides an opening for the fungus. And saying, oh, geez. So yes, that's not unusual. Not unusual. Yes.
Just a reminder, if I could, for the folks at home, if you would repeat the questions.
Oh yes, I forgot. Yes, yeah, I'll do that. I'm sorry. Thank you. I forgot that. Yes.
Back on the biotechnology, do you know if they did any testing on the soil surrounding these bioengineered trees? Because
Yeah, right.
this technology is a leaky technology.
Yeah, right.
And the free DNA and gene flow from the roots into the mycorrhizal fungi then spreads that out and communicates with all the other trees in the area.
Right.
It's not like moving checkers around on a checker.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah. No, it's good. The question is, have they done research on the soil around these transgenic trees? And sir, I'm going to tell you, I've been doing a lot of reading in preparation for this program tonight to be able to answer your questions. And I did not read anything of the tests that they've been done or hear anything about the soil testing that they've done in America, but that's a good point. But my gut feeling is that I'm sure they have. I just didn't read about that part. But again, if you leave your name, I will get back to you with the national. I'll call Kendra, the scientist, tomorrow. Kendra had an interesting question. I've never been asked that question before. It's a very good question. I'll check that out, and I'll get back to you. Yes, miss. Okay, so the question is, what kind of soil will the American chestnut trees grow best in? What do you need to know about the soil? And when I first got here in Rutland in 2012, and I'm thinking, oh, I got a great 8th grade project. We'll plant trees at Pine Hill Park. I had to read about where did American chestnuts grow, so I found some old books written in the early 1900s, 1800s about the American chestnut trees. And they said, oh, they like rocky soil. And sure enough, there's some rocky, as you know, if you've been up to the park, there's some rocky ledges. Where did I got it? Well, that is not where they like to grow the best, by any means at all. They like, typically, if you had like the soil right outside here in the library or the lawns around here, they do really, really well. The fields you saw on the pictures, the school grounds, that type of soil, they grow very well. Grass. No, not really. No, they won't do acid soil. If they're not going to grow in a place where you have a lot of pine trees and eastern hemlocks, which are very acid soil, right? And they don't like to be flooded, So, but they grew really well on the floodplains historically, of the Connecticut River and close to the water around the Lake Champlain region. That's why it grows on those two borders of Vermont. So, yes.
So I'm so impressed with your enthusiasm,
Oh,
and I love the fact that you're looking into the wild chestnuts. I am very, very skeptical, nervous of the unintended consequences of the transgenic.
Yes.
We, as a
No,
as a scientific community,
right. Yeah.
we don't have a great track record.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we do things and believe that we're doing the right thing.
Right.
You know, you can just look at Louisiana, right? As,
Yeah.
we dammed everything up and we've made the levees, and then the
Yep.
floods don't naturally bring the soil back in, and that's just rock
Right,
instead of soil. So I absolutely respect you and appreciate your enthusiasm for the wild chestnut trees.
Yeah.
I just hope that as you present, especially to children, that enthusiasm is for the wild and the natural, as opposed to just teaching them that it'll all be okay because science at this point says it is. And I'm not against science.
Right.
And I know that several members of your organization have quit. Left
Yes,
the
that's correct. Yes.
because of this particular.
That's right. Right.
thing. So I just.
Yes.
This is fascinating to me.
Right.
But I hope that
Yeah.
our enthusiasm is
Right.
tempered
Right.
by the
I-
unintended
I-
consequences of a lot of things. That
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I tell you, I agree with you 100%. My first thought about transgenic trees years ago was like, and so, like I said at the very beginning, I said, I'm going to have trouble convincing people when they hear GMO, even myself, it's like, I don't know. But all I can tell you, having known these scientists for these years that I've worked with the foundation, all the tests that they've been doing, all the experiments they've been doing for decades, all points to it should be okay. I mean, the EPA, we thought they're going to give us an okay now, and they haven't. And to me, it's like, fine, take your time, because when you do say it's okay, I think we'll get more support. But yes, there have been some foundation, in the higher ups, foundation members that have quit because they don't feel that this is the right thing to do.
As this gentleman said, what we've learned about trees and their ability to communicate with each other. And
Right, yes.
Very complex systems.
Yes.
And everything.
Yes. Yes.
Probably, in my opinion, I'm organic farmer. So
Yeah, right.
In my opinion,
Yeah.
it's not something that we want to
Right.
take lightly.
Can I tell you one thing? When you go up to Rocky Pond, there's 20 trees, American chestnut trees planted near Rocky Pond, right there, because it's wide open. They love sunlight. They do really well. And all those trees are doing okay. But I intentionally planted 10 of them very close to the forest trees. I was just curious because of what you said, the knowledge that we're gaining about the relationships of trees have amongst themselves and the connections they have. I think we're still learning a lot. And I planted them to think that maybe there's something that these trees and the forest know that the American chestnut tree might learn from. And I planted them where I shouldn't have, because they're getting partly shaded now. But I had that. So, well, thank you. Yes, sir.
Forgive me, my question is going to relate to a handful of things that were already said.
Okay.
What you just brought up was a funny one. So I purchased a property in southern Vermont in 2008, and the previous landowner had planted 3 American chestnuts from the society. When I purchased the property, they were probably about 12 feet high, really healthy young trees. They grew to be about 15 feet high. And
How?
15?
15, okay.
Yeah, 15 feet high. And they all produced nuts at one point or another. Not viable. They produced
The what? The nuts, that the shriveled up nuts.
Yeah, shriveled up nuts.
Yeah.
But boy, it was fun, the
Yeah.
flowering. The one along the forest survived the longest. The 2 out front died to the ground from
Huh, that's,
lasted another year or two, and
Yeah.
that one died to the ground. My question is, related to the roots surviving and the sprigs coming back, there's one of them is still doing that, sending up shoots. You can see they have blight right away as soon as they get above ground. If I plant something from here, is that putting that at risk? Should I knock that down completely and
no,
get rid of what's there?
no,
before I introduce something
no,
else?
the fungus is all over the place.
Right.
It's all around, so it doesn't make any difference. It's there anyways. They're in the forest, so no, go ahead and plant your trees. Now these come from big American. These are the champion trees from New Hampshire, and they've done really well. They're all infected, but I mean they've grown to huge heights and they're producing lots of nuts. So they're very likely to do very well with these trees. The ones that you originally got where they died, not sure where they came from, but these, just from my experience of planting, I've planted now about 150 trees in this whole area by itself. They pretty much all, I have a few die, but they all do really well.
They lasted for a long time. They did really well. They got about that big around.
Wow, wow.
Trees, but 1 year,
Yeah.
all right to the ground.
Yeah.
And you can see it's exactly
Yeah.
what they had. It was like,
Well, try these. See how these champion ones do pretty well. They do really good. So basically, it's about 80% success rate with them. Pretty good. So yeah, if you get a chance to visit some of the Allen Street School Orchard, please do. It's kind of cool to see it. Or when you go up to Pine Hill Park, look for those red flags. Wherever you see an open spot in the forest, there's going to be an American chestnut that was planted there. Okay. And you might run into me because I'm up there all the time watering them, fertilizing them, spraying them to keep the deer off, getting the weeds away, cutting back branches. Jeez. It's like a lot of time. You know, it's funny. Wow. What a, here I was, a little boy growing up in the deserts of New Mexico. It's funny, when I was just a little kid in elementary school, my eyes were always pointing out. I always had an interest in what was going on outside, and running around in the forest, running around the desert. And of course, our hope was always to run across a rattlesnake or a Gila monster. But I always had that interest of the outdoors throughout my whole life. So this has been a passion for me, and I think it's one of the reasons NASA hired me was because they saw I had a passion for in my interest in space exploration too. So that's what I try to tell students in schools I go to. Find your passion, and you'll have a job, and it won't be work for you. It'll be something that you love. It's not work, so work towards that in your life. Well, any more questions? Good. Thank you. Does anybody want to take any trees? I'm just curious. Anybody? Oh, great. That's super. Well, I'll help you out. Let me get you set up for you.